right, thank you so much for staying with us here on Weekend Express. And right now in studio, we want to delve into a discussion with my guest this morning. Thank you so much for joining me. This is George Kegoro, the Executive Director of the Kenya Human Rights Commission, and Regina Opondo, who is the Executive Director of the Constitution and Reform Education and Consortium, CRECO. Thank you so much, lady and gentlemen, for making time to join us this morning. And let's just begin by talking about what you were just telling me before we came on set on the shrinking space. Tell us a bit about that, George.
I think shrinking space is shrinking civic space. That's how the term has been coined. Is a phenomenon that is being witnessed in many parts of the world, including in this country, where governments are cracking down on people who have got different views from the officially ordained view about things. Basically, where governments are trying to order society to have only one view. All of us are agreed about everything, speak in one voice. So in this country, it has expressed itself in several forms. You've seen in the last 2 years or 3 years since the Jubilee came to power, these the exercise of regulatory power in terms of which they say some NGOs, for example, have not complied with the law, and they're going to ban them. They accuse people of involvement in terrorism, of undermining the state, and those types of things. So those are the typical types of accusations, and what drives the closing of civic space is governments feel insecure, and the government and the reason why governments feel insecure has got everything to do with modern technologies. You've seen that citizens now don't have to rely on organized media for them to communicate. There's the power of social media, where people are able to organize away from mainstream spaces, and so governments feel that they never get to know enough about what is going on. Previously, the biggest fear, and we've seen that also in this country, the biggest fear is 1 million people gathered in a public square who are angry and saying down with the dictator or something like that. So that was the big fear. But now the big fear is an army of people organizing on social media, everybody from their house, and the governments don't know what's brewing. So so there's an impulse to control, an impulse to pry, an impulse to try and find out what's going on in case they are taken by surprise over people organizing quietly through other means.
Right, and of course this is a conversation that really also ramps support from the international community in terms of the democratic space here in the country. And Regina, CRECO brings together a consortium of civil society organizations. What has been your experience in the same matter?
Similar to what George has said, I think since this new regime came into place, we've experienced the space that we fought for, that many people died for, in the 20 years leading up to the second liberation, culminating in the new constitution. We had all these great gains, a very expansive and comprehensive Bill of Rights, but we've seen those being taken away slowly and slowly. So the space for civil society to organize, the space for the media to express itself and pass information, which is usually very important for citizens, that has been taken away slowly and slowly, sometimes through laws. So we've seen attempts to amend the Public Benefits Organizations Act, which is a progressive act that would have made the sector more vibrant, more accountable, and better run, and recognizing how civil society has grown. The media yourselves, you've experienced, I think, 2 legislations that are quite retrogressive. And I think even quasi-government bodies such as the commissions have been experiencing challenges. So maybe not in terms of regulation, but frustrations in how the leadership is managed. It takes too long, how much funding they get. And these are bodies that speak for citizens. So if increasingly they do not find space to speak or space to act or space to organize, then they cannot support citizens, which means even citizens will not find that space for them to act. And that's a big disgrace, because one of the major things of the new constitution was sovereignty of the Kenyan people.
Right.
And when you speak of Article 10, public participation, how else will citizens participate if they cannot speak, if they don't have that room to speak, if they cannot get information from the media, if they cannot get support from civil society or the faith-based community, if they have nobody to support them to realize that sovereignty and that expression of their sovereignty.
Right, and of course a very worrying trend there if we're getting to times where people, the freedom of expression, association is being limited. Then what next then? What are we supposed to do if even the civil societies who speak for the people really, if we're getting this kind of space getting shrunk, who then will speak for the people? What is this next step then? Are we helpless, George?
I think the actors in civil society are beginning to organize or are continuing to organize in ways that seek to counter the pushbacks by governments against them. One types of pushback, of course, is the demonization of donor funding. So you have government saying that if you're funded by foreign donors, that is somehow supposed to be questionable or wrong, and one of the ways, therefore, the crackdown is by preventing through law, for example, outlawing the receiving of foreign funds, and they've done that in Russia and places like that. So some of the ways in which people have organized to remain afloat is to find ways of different ways of channeling funding where this has been stopped, and we've had an equivalent of that in this country where there has been an attempt to pass legislation that limits the amount of foreign funding NGOs can receive. Another way of organizing is obviously to show the public or go to the public directly and take their case to it against the government and say, contrary to the accusations that have been made against us, we actually have a benefit for the public.
Right.
We are a watchdog, or we pass information that helps the public to become a watchdog. So basically demonstrate its value, demonstrate our value to the public in such a manner that then you hope authorities will be think twice before taking any further steps that are adverse to our interests. Another method, of course, is to demonstrate accountability and transparency, because one of the accusations is that NGOs or independent organizations are fomenting or are somehow not accountable, like they don't pay taxes, or they steal money that has been given to them. So trying to become accountable and trying to demonstrate accountability also helps to counter those accusations. Another method that has been used is to also come together, create solidarity, and build a bulwark that makes it more difficult for authorities to be effective in exercising backlash against NGOs.
Right, and Regina, George speaks about accountability because you'd want to imagine the authorities are not coming out of nowhere in saying that, you know, we're getting funds, but in most cases you don't even get to see how effective and how it's being used for public benefit. Is there a kind of self-regulation in the civil society?
In fact, the best thing the government would have done to improve accountability in the sector was to operationalize the Public Benefits Organization Act. Civil society as a sector recognized that we had a challenge. So we had an area of weakness in that there was a perception that because some of us were not as good as they should have been. So there were briefcase organizations, you had the Mongos, my own NGOs, and the Gongos, and all those happening. And so recognizing that, we then started to reflect and think, what do we need to improve the sector? Now, we had the NGO Coordination Act, but that was not sufficient, and that was only dealing with a small section of the sector. So for over 5 years, we spent talking to different sectors, speaking to government, and after a lot of consultation, came up with the Public Benefits Organization Act, which was signed into law just before, in 2013, January, by Kibaki. Now, since then, the law is sitting on a shelf.
Right.
The law has very clear mechanisms about how the sector would self-regulate, how it would improve accountability, but even without the law, I mean, there are systems in place.
Right.
So NGOs, public benefit organizations, civil society organizations are expected to file returns with either KRA or with the NGO board or however they are registered.
So systems
which
are
they
in
do.
place.
Systems are in place.
Right.
Yes, and so what they should do is punish those that are not following the law and use the law to do that. But what we've seen instead is a refusal to to make this law that would help improve the sector actually work. So it's sitting on a shelf somewhere. It was passed into law. Kibaki signed it, but it's not been operationalized. So it's not in use. Instead, what we've seen are attempts to use arbitrary laws. So sometimes the NGO board wakes up and decides to deregister 500 organizations. It will say some of them it's because of terrorism, some of them it's because of money. But when you dig deeper, there's no ground to those accusations.
Right.
And one of the ways in which organizations have fought back is go to court and say, what is the basis of your accusation? If you have truth, if you have honest data or information, then table it. And they've been unable to table it. So we've seen 2 organizations have their accounts frozen on issues of, on accusations of being linked to terrorism. Nothing came out of those accusations. The Kenya Human Rights Commission was a victim. They were apparently had underreported, but even the numbers that were reported in the media were wrong. And they went to court, and the court has vindicated them. So that's one of the ways that civil society is fighting back. The court has been very useful, not just on the laws or the illegalities that regulate our sectors, but on even things like the Security Laws Amendment Act, which would have affected not just civil society organizations, but Kenyans in their own individual capacity.
Right.
So you have a state that is passing laws that are illegal, that are contrary to the Constitution. For us, I think the court has been quite useful in helping to show that this is not the way, and so there's a pushback. So Kenyans are not on their own. I think there is hope and there's light at the end of the tunnel, and we'll continue pushing.
There's a pushback.
Yeah.
Right. And let's talk about democratic governance in the country. And at the moment, we are seeing a situation where there's problems in almost all the institutions in the country, the courts, the National Assembly, in terms of being independent in pushing agendas forward, for example, the IBC. And just talking about the standoff that we've seen between the leading Jubilee coalition and CORD in terms of, electoral reforms. What's your take in terms of the position that these two have, been very hardlined on?
Regina and I, together with other colleagues, are part of a process, a campaign called Kura Yangu Sauti Yangu, which was launched sometime last month and which seeks, it's a platform that seeks to create political dialogue ahead of the next elections. So we've had many activities that we've been doing. One of them was a very public launch to which we invited all actors that are involved and interested in politics. Yesterday we issued a statement that is basically an updated position on all the developments that have happened around the country. And what we said in that statement was that what has been done, what has happened within Jubilee, accepting that dialogue is something that is possible now is welcome, but it's something that has got to be again then processed carefully. I think the main difference right now is the forum where that dialogue is going to take place and the manner in which the dialogue is going to take place. Jubilee is saying that you go to Parliament and that's where they want to do this. And it's difficult to see that Parliament would ever be a suitable place for any meaningful dialogue to take place, and there are many reasons for that. One of the reasons is that Parliament is a place for making laws. What is being demanded or what the country needs is not law reform. It's not to pass laws. What we have as a country is the problem that we are going into elections very shortly, and there's very little public trust in the institutions that run those elections. So the response has got to be, what do we do to build public trust for our electoral mechanism, for our electoral arrangements? It may be that some people need to leave office, as has been said. It also may be that you may need to pass 1 or 2 laws, but the essential problem has got to be that people need to come together and find ways of building public trust. They can't do that by going to a parliamentary committee.
But so then, George, what is the place of the rule of law, which has stipulated how to go about, the IBC, disbandment, so to speak? Which is Jubilee what is saying that we need to go by the Constitution to solve this problem.
You see, the thing is this: before people go to a policy process, legislation as part of a policy process is the last stage. And the earlier stages would be, let's all have an agreed definition of what the problem is and what would be the necessary response to that problem. So that's got to be something that people discuss together. And the people who discuss together would be all the relevant people that are necessary for whatever decisions need to be made. So you can't be told, go to Parliament for resolving an unprocessed issue. So the processing can't happen in Parliament.
So they have to first sit down together and agree, you know, define
What is the
problem.
problem?
Right.
What is the solution? And some solutions can be in Parliament. Some solutions are definitely not in Parliament. And the ones that are in Parliament, for me, would be very, very few. The preponderance of solutions for this country have got to do with a very low level of public trust. So public trust can be, you can't pass legislation and say, from now on, there will be public trust. It is people saying, what ails us as a country? What has made our politics become so bad and so competitive and so balkanized? What makes some people in the country feel like they are second-class citizens, like they don't matter, that they will never matter in this country? It's those types of conversations that then build trust, that everybody commits solemnly to. The president talked about this covenant during his State of the Nation address. Right. That spirit that he was trying to bring out in that address, it is what is needed now. He needs to lead everybody together and say, let's sit together. What is your problem? What is your problem? So now, on the one hand, you have these lofty things that he's saying in the address, and giving the impression that it's nice, let's all come together. Then when you have got problems, he tells you, I'm not involved, go to those people, go to parliamentarians, talk to them about your problems. It does not concern me. It is not the essential problem of this country that we go to a parliamentary situation to process unresolved or unprocessed matters.
Regina, what's your take on that? Is the solution outside of Parliament, in Parliament?
As part of Kura Yangu Sauti Yangu, we feel that the solution is definitely a dialogue, but a dialogue that brings on a wide number of stakeholders. Right. So far, the way this issue has been framed is like Kenya is a two-party state. We've moved from one party to multi-party to two-party state. And there are various stakeholders who should be involved in this discussion. Right. So what we are pushing for is a multi-sectoral approach that brings together different stakeholders. And now, as Kura Yangu Sauti Yangu, we had identified these issues, and the issues we've been discussing in our various capacities as individual organizations or individuals since 2013. Right. So the issues we're actually discussing now are not new. We knew there was a problem in 2013. I think a few other people have tried to do things about them, but nobody has been given hearing, or it didn't become important until the crisis, until COD went to the streets and it became a crisis, is when we are paying attention to these issues. So now that it is a crisis and we have to resolve it and time is ticking, it's good that we have agreed that we need dialogue. And I think I wholeheartedly welcome the move by the president towards dialogue. What we need is to find a middle ground. I am with George. As Kura Yangu Sauti Yangu, we don't feel the solution is solely within Parliament. Parliament is one of the arms that will have to implement the resolutions of the dialogue. Right. We also feel that the agenda of only having IBC is too narrow, and the issue of the commissioners only, because when you take just the issue of IBC, it has very many issues, which we have consulted and spoken with different people, including the IBC about. So if you put the commissioners aside, we need a discussion around voter registration, the voter register. Right. What is the conclusive
so it's a bigger
final
conversation
register?
Than just the
exactly. So there are things that can be resolved through Parliament, through a legislative process, but there are things that need a conversation. The conversation around whether we need technologies or not, is that going to be solved by Parliament? No, it'll have to be given to somebody else. There are other issues we identified include the two-thirds gender rule at national level. We've still not sorted that out. Parliament failed to pass the law, and it has an effect on the elections. It's an electoral issue. It's not a women's issue. Right. We have the challenges of the Supreme Court, and the judiciary in general, and that's where arbitration around any disputes on elections will go to. So if that is a mess and we've not sorted it out before the elections, when are we going to sort it out? Right. So we need to have a discussion around what are the problems in the judiciary, what can we sort out, what needs to be sorted out within Parliament, what needs to be sorted out within the judiciary, what needs to be sorted out within JSC. So you see, there are very many actors.
Right.
If these actors are not at the table, at discussion, and I know you can't open the discussion to everybody, but you can have representation, then how do you expect them to implement to that commitment of this is something we agree to, this is something we are wholeheartedly behind, this is something we own, so we will implement it. So our proposal is that let's have a dialogue. Let's bring in representation from the two parties.
Right.
Yesterday we proposed 4, but they can decide on the number. So 4 from the 2 big parties. But we also remember we have other parties. They are smaller, but they're not lesser.
Right.
They
also
represent
have a voice.
Kenyans.
Right.
So let's have those parties also represented. Let's have the faith-based groups represented because they've managed to bring people together to talk. Let's have the civil society represented. They're speaking for the Kenyans. Let's have the private sector. Let's have even the independent commissions represented. You know, that can be agreed upon.
Right.
There's a way in which dialogue is done. You know, you have several stages. So where we're at now is the pre-dialogue stage, where we agree on the agenda, we agree on who comes to the table, we even agree on the convener. So in Parliament, you still have a parliamentary convener who might not necessarily be neutral, depending on where you sit. But you can have an independent convener. And our proposal as of yesterday was we can have a convenership that brings together 3 people. So 2 Kenyans and maybe 1 international who is trusted by all sides, who can bring all people to the table.
And be believed to be, you know,
yeah, so we're at the
objective.
pre-dialogue stage before we get to the dialogue. Once we agree on, you know, we discuss the agenda, who sits at the table, who convenes us, what our rules are, then we go to the table.
Right.
Discuss the issues, come up with resolutions, and then the post-dialogue phase, which is implementation. And that's where our role comes in, I think, as the media and as civil society to monitor that implementation and make sure it's done well.
Right.
Where we've gotten to this far, it has taken a lot. People have died, businesses have been destroyed, property has been lost. So it would be a shame to only limit the dialogue to one issue when we have a moment that we're able to tackle the other issues. Are we going to solve this one issue of IBC, then wait for more people to die, solve the Supreme Court, wait for more people to die and solve? Let's take the bull by the horns. Kenyans are not cowards, and so we should not be cowardly. We should be able to tackle this thing and finish it.
Right. And it sounds there like we have a bag of issues and problems to solve before we get into the next elections, which is just a few months away, or just about a year away. And George, what is your take on the state of preparedness, you know, as a country to go into the next general elections?
We're definitely not prepared. One of the signs of preparation would have to be that there's a broad agreement on what needs to be done, and there's enough time to do that. Now we are at the stage where we are still in very significant disagreement about about the things that need to be done. If you look at the IBC, I think the country is resolved that it will have to do something about the current commissioners of the IBC. So the assumption is that the commissioners will one day leave office before the next elections. There's an appointment process for their replacement, and they would have to acclimatize and start the process of getting themselves ready to run elections. So that is one big, huge area that is not ready. Where the judiciary is an elections organ in its own right, because the Supreme Court in particular gets to decide disputes relating to the presidential elections. The judiciary is currently in disarray. You've seen judges who are fighting very, very publicly. Even the case that is pending before them in the Supreme Court, you've seen them take extremely public position. You can tell how they're going to decide that case, who is going to go which way and who is going to go the other way. The Supreme Court has broken down the middle. Any pretense of civility or fairness or open-mindedness about approaching the issues before them has completely broken down. So how does the public get to trust a court that is not in that state to be an arbiter of high politics that is involved in elections? And then